Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. And the 1.24.1 test server just went live yesterday, and with it comes a whole new branch of Polish tank destroyers, starting at tier 5 and working up to tier 10. Today I'm going to let you know everything there is to know about what is going to be the next branch in World of Tanks, coming in probably about 3 or 4 weeks from now. Now, keep in mind, this is a test server, and while everything is subject to change, usually in the last 3 or 4 test servers, the statistics that we have at the start are the statistics that we have at the end. Accordingly, what you're going to see here is probably what you're going to be playing very soon. So, the new Polish tank destroyer branch starts at tier 4, and as you work your way up towards the high tier, these vehicles have a brand new mechanic of dealing less damage the longer the distance that you fire, as well as also having deep rifled guns that can fire star tray shells, which really do look very, very different, as evident by the shape of the barrel. But more on that later. We're going to be working our way up towards the top of the tech tree, but let's start at tier 5. And the first and most important thing to do is to tell you all how much experience you have to save to be able to get the new Zadymka. And it is 11,830. So uncheck accelerated crew training in your 14 TP and get just shy of 12,000 experience if you want to be ready to play the Polish tank destroyers on day 1 of the patch. So, the Zadymka. How good is this tank when it's stock? That's always something I like to look at with these videos. Well, the penetration, this doesn't look very good. Let's be honest. For a tier 5 tank, this gun would be okay on a tier 5 medium. But if you load a few gold rounds, it's probably still going to be playable. It's just you're not going to have too much fun with it. The upgrade on this path is really simple. Firstly, get yourself the gun. You don't need the tracks on this tank. And once you've got this gun, the 90mm, now you're hitting for 240 alpha. You've got okay pen, but not that good damage per minute, with mediocre accuracy and relatively poor aim time. Luckily, if you've already played Polish tanks, the radio will be unlocked using mediums such as the Boogie, and it is the same weight, so you might as well just whack it on as soon as you get the vehicle. Then you want to get the engine, then you want to get the tracks. That will be my upgrade path for this tank. So let's just do a quick visual inspection. What do I think of the Zadymka? Well, what does it remind me of? It kind of reminds me of a little bit of one of the low tier Swedish tank destroyers. I think it's the IKV-72. Although, yeah, bizarre. You've got this really well-angled front plate on the side. A weird design there with the way that it's, I guess, riveted down and angled below the mantlet on this tank. It's bizarre that these cabins don't go further back, but they have an overhang. I'm not sure if that's ammo or just extra storage on the back. And it definitely has kind of Soviet influence, looking like the tier 2 Soviet tank destroyer, the AT-1. So statistics-wise, it's pretty darn fast. It's got awful view range of 280. That is not going to allow you to see anyone. You might as well almost just give up on using binoculars on this tank and just go and drive to a heavy tank flank. But does it have the armor to be able to do that? Well, it's got 100 at the front, which means that it's not ricocheting itself. But however, let's compare it to, I don't know, an innocent tier 5 medium like the Cavalier that's using the 75mm gun. Okay, well now its hull armor is actually pretty good on the structure, but its actual hull armor isn't so good. But if it uses its gun depression, that front plate becomes an auto ricochet with the 7 degrees. So it looks like this tank will do very well inside a nice matchup with regards to its armor, but not so well outside of it. All in all, I don't really see this thing being too special. Sure, I think it's going to be better than a Stug, but with that kind of view range, it's never going to be able to play that snipey role. And I just think that the amount of hit points this vehicle gets of 480, as well as not having the best armor, you know, gold rounds and even regular rounds can easily go through the hull armor on this tank. I think this is going to be an absolute snack at tier 5 and probably quite a painful tank to play. Okay, that's the Zadymka. Let's take a look now at the tier 6, which is going to be the Burza. Okay, let's just take a look at it visually to get an idea of what this tank looks like. Wow, it kind of reminds me of a French self-propelled gun immediately right from the start, like a Lorraine. But apart from that, also maybe vaguely like the new Japanese tank destroyers. I think the Cheeto SP at tier 7, kind of getting that vibe of the vehicle. Yeah, just a generic tank without a turret, really. Quite tall, going to be quite hard to hide. And notice how there's a big amount of structure above the gun, like you would be used to on the Japanese tank destroyers or even some of the German tank destroyers like the Ferdinand. But this is at tier 6. So how bad is this thing going to be when it is stock? Well, it uses the same top gun as the previous tank, so well done to Wargaming for that. It has worse damage per minute than the previous vehicle, though, but at least you have reasonable alpha for tier 6, kind of behaving a bit like a Jagdpanzer 4, just without the outrageous damage per minute and with fairly poor accuracy. I don't think that gun is going to do too well, but it should be playable. So how is the 100mm on this tank? Okay, the alpha damage increases to 280. Lovely. The penetration goes up to reasonable levels for tier 6. Pretty good. Damage per minute is nice as well. The aim time of 2.1 is great, but the accuracy of 0.4 is pretty horrible. So this tank, what kind of other statistics does it have? Well, again, it's pretty fast, 50 with a decent power to weight. Going to behave a bit more like a medium tank with that regard. It will do very well once you get the field mods on this tank, but then you're probably playing the tier 7 because they will significantly improve those ground resistances and look, increase the speed of this tank on medium terrain by 6 kilometers an hour. Absolutely outrageous. Again, the vehicle's as blind as a bat, but at least not as bad as the previous tank. 320 means that, you know, you struggle to decide about whether you're putting binoculars on this vehicle or invest, hopefully, into the armor that the vehicle has. And boy, does it have armor. 150 at the front means that while it's not going to do so well when it's getting shot by 182 millimeters of penetration, let's compare it to, I don't know, another tier 6 medium, like a Cromwell firing standard rounds. Okay, so the structure's really good until the Cromwell loads gold, and then it's not. Okay, so this vehicle will probably do well against lower tier tanks or equal tier tanks that aren't firing gold, but it's going to be an absolute feast for higher tier vehicles to engage. But as soon as it's using its gun depression, then its armor, well, it's still not good against gold or reasonable amounts of pen, but it will be playable in certain scenarios. I'm noticing one horrible weak point, though, of the Burza, and that is that it's got 15 millimeters of flap armor that go all underneath this awkward sticky out part here. So that means that you're going to be able to shoot up into that with 46mm caliber guns and overmatch it. So easy opportunity when this thing crests a ridgeline, or even if it's just using any of its gun depression, that is going to be an easy shot for you. Just to show you what that looks like visually, just shoot behind the front guard there, the flap on the front, and then you're going to be able to just easily overmatch this tank. So big weakness of the Polish tanks. All in all, I don't think it's going to be very good unless it's in a good matchup. That's how I'm feeling about this tank. The view range won't allow it to play at long range. The armor will only allow it to play in close quarters combat against equal and lower tier tanks. The damage per minute is good. The 280 alpha is good. It's just, don't think it's doing too well for tier 6. And I think even a Jagdpanzer 4 will be better than this tank for the most part. All right, let's jump up to tier 7 and see if the Gowika is anything to get excited about. Well, let's firstly do a visual inspection of this tank. And wow, this thing is looking different. Kind of reminds me a bit of one of the Italian tank destroyers, at least visually. But wow, this thing has a gigantic forehead, and that's from somebody who probably takes one to know one within this regard. That means it's going to be easy for your opponents to be able to shoot the structure unless it's incredibly good on this vehicle. Kind of looks like a T2580 that ate all of the pies, or it's bred with Smolets, at least inside World of Tanks, right? Yeah, looks like just a pure assault TD. Let's take a look to see what the upgrade path will be on the vehicle. So how bad is this thing stock? That's really not very good for an assault TD, but at least it's got some good damage per minute for tier 7. Not too bad, but yeah, the gun isn't really going to win any prizes. So the first thing I would do on this tank is to get the 122mm. That means that now you're hitting for 420. Wow, this is basically like having the gun that's on the 53 TP, but down a tier at tier 7. You're going to lose a little bit of damage per minute, but that is so worth it to gain that amount of penetration and that alpha. This gun will give something like a Jagdpanther a run for its money, that's for sure. So after you've got the gun, luckily the radio will already be unlocked from the 45 TB Habisha, so you're going to be able to equip that on the vehicle, but only if it's lighter. It's actually 29 kilograms heavier for only 50 meters view range, so I'm probably not actually going to put that one on the vehicle. Not view range, I mean radio range. And then I'm going to get the engine, and then I'm going to get the tracks on this tank. So how do the other statistics of the Gowika hold up? Well, it's got decent damage per minute. Not the best accuracy. 7 degrees of gun depression, like all of these vehicles so far. 340 meters view range means that there is an argument that you could put binoculars on this vehicle to at least engage at long ranges. And considering it goes at 50, you probably could maintain those ranges, but its performance on medium and soft is going to be bad. So get off-road driving on all of your drivers for these Polish tanks by the look of it. But I guess it's got to be the armor. Let's see how the armor holds up. That is not bad armor, 200 millimeters on the structure. And when you're using your gun depression, it goes up to, well, about 210. Yeah, you've got the flat problem here of being overmatched by all 46 millimeter caliber guns and a terrible lower plate. What a bizarre tank. It's going to be like an assault TD, but it's an assault TD that also only has 850 hit points. At least the mantlet is, well, actually, no, it's not even that good. Yeah, I don't really think this thing is going to do very well, boys and girls. I think it's going to be a bit of a stinker. If we compare it to the Jagdpanther, for example, the Jagdpanther has the better damage per minute, the same pen, less alpha, to be fair, 100 less alpha, better aim time, better accuracy, better gun handling, really good gun arc compared to the Gowika. And that's something we must mention about these Polish tank destroyers, is they have a very limited gun arc. So that means that if you track them, that you're easily going to be able to get their side even from this angle and just farm them up. So that is not a good thing. The Jagdpanther has the better gun depression. The Jagdpanther has the better top speed. It has the better power to weight ratio and equal ground resistances. And while it does have significantly worse armor, they've got the same amount of hit points, and it's got 10 meters extra view range. Yeah, I guess one of the advantages is that it's actually got pretty good camo rating on the Gowika. Yeah, I don't think this thing is going to do very well outside of just those really nice matchups against tier 5 and tier 6 opponents where they don't shoot at your lower plate with regular rounds or even with any kind of gold rounds. I don't see this thing being super strong, but maybe I'm missing something. Okay, so far disappointing really for the Polish tank destroyers. Maybe the Kilana at tier 8 is going to be the new best thing. Wow, it's actually got access to the deep rifled rounds. So that's maybe going to be the saving grace of this vehicle. So the Kilana, let's take a look at it. Wow, this thing looks a lot like an SU-122 44, although it'll be at tier 8 rather than tier 7. Kind of also looks like a Kanonen Jagdpanzer that's rather fat. Yeah, that's the vibe of this tank. I like the way the gun seems to be smack bang in the center, so we don't really have to worry about that too much. Or is it slightly off center? Yeah, it looks like it is maybe just a touch off center, unless maybe Wargaming just have it facing the wrong way. Either that or I'm getting paranoid. No, yeah, it looks like it might be just a touch off center. But I digress. It's only going to do someone with OCD, not saying that I have that. So what is there to look forward to on this vehicle? Well, let's take a look at the stock gun. Wow, so this is a deep rifled gun which can fire star tray shells. And it has different alpha damages depending on the distance of the shell, well, the distance the shell has traveled. So if it hits a target at 50 meters, it's going to do 600. If it hits a target at 500 meters, it's going to do 400. So you lose 33% of the alpha damage depending on how far the shell has traveled. So you're going to have monstrous damage per minute, 2,553 at close ranges, but as soon as you are shooting at decent distances, and that damage per minute is going to drop down to more like a tier 8 medium tank. Interestingly enough, these star shells have incredible shell velocity. We're talking about 1,100 on the standard rounds, and the premium rounds have 1,370. So kind of weird that Wargaming are making these vehicles bad at long range, but they're giving them really good shell velocity, so they don't have to give much lead at long range, which is usually one of the traits that you want to have on a sniping tank. My recommended upgrade path on this vehicle will be firstly the gun, and this is very interesting. The upgraded gun, which is 100 to 162 millimeter, has more alpha damage by 100, but less alpha damage at 500 meters. It goes down to 350, so you're actually doing half the damage at decent distances. So this means that the smaller gun, the stock gun, is actually better at long ranges, significantly better at long ranges with its better rate of fire than the larger gun will be. How bizarre. I guess Wargaming are using the stock gun as like a training gun for people on this vehicle, and then once they've got used to the mechanics, then they can have to feel the full brunt. One thing that is cool about this gun is 269 millimeters of pen and 302 on the premium is nice for tier 8. There's no doubt about that. The DPM is outrageous, but remember that's only going to be in close quarters combat, and that's going to go down to half of that, like 1,350 damage per minute at 500, which is not really going to do the business at long range. So the Kilana, 2,700 base damage per minute, that decent distance, but the top speed has now dropped down to 40, so these higher tier Polish tank destroyers aren't going to be quick like the lower tier. Its gun arc is horrible, like the previous tiers. 7 degrees of gun depression is quite nice though. The view range at 350 means it will be able to spot for itself, but relatively blind. 1,400 hit points is a massive upgrade going from tier 7 to tier 8, as with most of the tank destroyers in the game. And now we must take a look at the armor of this vehicle, which apparently is 200. Okay, so what is it like when it's not angled? That's actually very good. 245 millimeters of armor is very decent, up to 260 without using its gun depression. And when it is using its gun depression, oh yeah, 280 millimeters of armor at tier 8. Yeah, this thing is looking good. Remember, flaps, if you have a 76 millimeter caliber gun, which most people do have once they're shooting at tier 8 tanks, you will be able to overmatch the flaps. And the lower plate on this tank is fairly tragic, but it does look like it's kind of like rounded here. So it's actually got 200 millimeters there that then drops down to 130 and then 115 and then 80 and then 55 on the lower plate. So it's tiered as you go across. All in all, this thing looks like it'll be really good as long as you can keep your opponents in the front, but as soon as they get the side, the mantlet there is weak, the side armor is atrocious, and if they can overmatch, that would be quite poor. I think this thing looks like it could be pretty good at tier 8, especially in a nice matchup. And even not, you will have to pay the gold price to be able to go through this vehicle. Tier 10 tanks with standard rounds are only going to have a 50-50 or less chance of being able to go through it. This looks like the first tank in the line that might actually be worth playing. And while I'm not suggesting that you jump up the tech tree, as it does start to get very expensive to free experience or blueprint your way through these tanks, at least this one is looking like it might be worth a space in your garage or investing some extra time into. Okay, that was the tier 8 STP-58 Kilana. Let's take a look now at the tier 9. This is the Gonkiewicza. Oh my god, I'm sorry for all of my Polish friends out there. I'm probably ruining the pronunciation. But let's take a look at this vehicle. Is it a good one? Wow. Let's do a quick visual inspection first. Wow, these mantlets and the way that the shells are shaped is just absolutely so bizarre. Just a square. Looks like you're firing a ninja star, but just the wrong way. Anyway, I digress. This vehicle, it's quite similar to the previous tank within that regard. Looks like it has a bit more of a weak point on top. And ooh, what's this? The viewports are actually a lot flatter than the front face of the tank. That could be a weak point on the vehicle as well. The back of this tank, again, this looks so much like an SU-122-54 from back in the day, or just an SU-122-44. The 8, all of the bread and smallet at a higher tier, right? As I said earlier. Okay, cool. So, the Gonkiewicza. How good is this tank going to be when it's stock? Okay, so it uses the previous gun, which is absolutely fine at tier 9. 3,000 damage per minute in close quarters combat. That is playable stock. It's not going to be the best tank, but it's definitely playable. And 700 alpha damage? Yeah, I just realized 700 alpha damage at tier 8. That is pretty monstrous. And just quickly, my upgrade path on the tier 8 will be gun. I will take the radio, and very nicely, the radio is actually already researched on other vehicles. Then I'll take the engine, then I'll take the tracks. Sorry for the poor ordering there. But on this tank, that is perfectly playable. I'm quite excited to see what the gun will be on the tier 9 when it's upgraded. Okay, so you go from a 100 162 to an 85 175 millimeter gun. Bizarre. I wonder how the overmatch mechanics are going to work with these tanks. Anyway, 800 alpha damage. Ladies and gents, boys and girls, we have a new highest alpha at tier 9 as far as I'm aware with AP or APCR rounds. This thing looks monstrous. 300 alpha damage though at 500 meters. Wow, have you noticed how it's getting even more punishing with the damage drop off the higher you go up the tech tree? The tier 8, the stock gun still did 400, then the upgraded gun did 350, and then at tier 9 the upgraded gun does 300 at 500 meters. The extremes, Wargaming are really pushing these Polish tank destroyers into only fighting in close quarters combat, but 3,200 damage? It's not quite as good as a tortoise, but a tortoise doesn't have 800 alpha, right? These things could be really scary. So the penetration as well, 292 at tier 9. That's just great. The gold rounds, though, are a little bit disappointing at 321, so it looks like Wargaming, this isn't going to be replacing like a T110E3 kind of shell, where you can have 375 millimeters of pen and just absolutely dump it on your opponents. But that looks like a very scary gun. So the upgrade path on this tank, again, we're going to go for the gun. The radio you can take from any of your Polish top tier heavies. Then I'm going to take the engine. Then I'm going to take the tracks. So let's take a look at this vehicle, the Gonkiewicza. Gonkiewicza. Am I ruining this? Should we just put it into Google Translate? Come on, Google Translate, don't let me down.
Gonkiewicza.
Gonkiewicza. I got pretty close. I got pretty close, I feel. I'm going to count that as a win for Uncle Scrubby-Baby. So statistically, this thing can go at 42. Does it get a field mod which increases its top speed? No, it doesn't, but it actually gets a field mod that increases its rate of fire, like on a tortoise. So its damage per minute is going to go even higher than that. That's outrageous. The hit points are great for tier 9. View range 360, that's not great at all. These tanks aren't going to be able to spot for themselves at long range unless you invest a module in them, but at least it's not a disaster. Again, the gun arc is so narrow on the front of these tanks, it's going to be incredibly annoying to use at long range. 7 degrees of gun depression will make it fairly flexible. The armor is 190, and this is what's really exciting about this tank. How good is the armor when it's not angling? Okay, but well, remember, these shells are 292 millimeters of pen, so this is not bad. As I highlighted, that kind of viewport on the front of the tank is only 260, so that means regular rounds from tier 10 tanks should be able to challenge it half the time. Gold rounds will go through every single time. It does have a bit of a weak point on top, but let's see what happens as soon as you use your gun depression. As soon as you use your gun depression, the whole of the front of this tank is like 300 millimeters. So even the gold rounds on this vehicle are going to struggle. So that is some serious armor. The mantlet doesn't look like it has too many issues either, so that's a great thing. And the weak point becomes quite hard to hit when this vehicle is hull down. The only unfortunate thing is that if you have a 76mm caliber gun, you can shoot up into the flaps of this tank and be able to overmatch them. So just so you can see what that looks like from a visual perspective, just aim at this whole flap here, this kind of like guard over the front of the tank. Just aim at it and you're easily going to be able to go through this vehicle every single time. So all in all, this thing looks like it could be a little bit of a monster. No doubt. Do I think it's going to be broken OP? No, because if we go and we add in, for example, let's add in that Polish tank. Where is it? I can't see it yet. Here we go, the SDP-60, Gonkiewicza, and let's add in the Tortoise, for example. Right, look, the Tortoise has more damage per minute, and remember, the Tortoise can also deal that damage at 500 meters. Its shells are going to do 400 irrelevant of how far the shell flies, whereas on the Gonkiewicza, it's going to do 350 less than the Tortoise, as well as having the less base damage per minute. That is not a good sign for that vehicle at a decent distance. But remember, this vehicle is going to go twice as fast as a Tortoise. But I'd say all in all, they have fairly comparable armor, but doesn't have the weak point like the Tortoise does, but it has the alpha. Yeah, I think this tank could be actually really scary. When I look at it, really scary. It's going to be terrifying in close quarters combat. Not so much, I don't think, as a Tortoise because of that horrible gun arc as well. Remember that the Tortoise has a very wide gun arc. Look at that. You can go 20 degrees to the left, 20 degrees to the right, which makes it more like a semi-turreted tank. Whereas all of these Polish tanks, it's 5 degrees to the left and 5 degrees to the right. Accordingly, I would recommend tracking and flanking these vehicles. If you track them and then you just get this side like this, you're going to be able to go through them every single time. Easy kill on these tanks. And look at also notice how there are some bulges on this tank. If it tries to side scrape you, which it's not really going to be able to do with its gun arc, but bait you, you can probably just shoot through the side there as well. I still think that this tank is looking rather good, rather scary at close quarters combat, but it is going to be so inflexible with its poor view range, so inflexible at long range. They won't even be able to see its opponents, and even if it can, alpha damage of 350 with that kind of rate of fire, you're going to have the damage per minute of a Manticore at long range. Awful within that regard. A 15-second reload to do 350 damage at 500 meters? No thank you. But all in all, looking like a pretty scary vehicle. Another thing is, I haven't actually looked at what the shell velocity is like on this tank. What is the shell velocity like on this Top Gun? 1,700 meters a second shell velocity on the regular rounds and 2,000 on the gold rounds. You're going to pretty much be able to auto-aim at tanks. But then again, if you're firing these shells at a decent distance, the damage drops down to 300. Is it 300 really at 500 meters? That is abysmal. I thought it was 350. No, I'm getting confused. It was the stock gun that was 350 and it's the upgraded gun that's 300. You're going to have horrendous damage per minute on this tank at decent distances. Wow. Crazy stuff for the Polish tanks. They're literally putting all of their statistics towards brawling. That's what these tanks are meant for. So, without further ado, ladies and gents, boys and girls, let's jump up to tier 10 and take a look at the Błyskawica to see whether this is going to be the new king of tanks. So, firstly, let's take a look at it visually. Okay, yeah, it looks so much like an Su-12254, if anyone remembers that tier 9 Soviet tank that was removed from the game but still exists in the files. Looks like it has a bit of a weak point on top, and that's it really. The design hasn't really changed from tier 9 too much, but it's got better angling on the side ports here. Okay, so does it use the same gun as the previous tank? Yes, it does. It's exactly the same gun from tier 9 up to tier 10. So let's take a look at this thing statistically and see if the Błyskawica, which is, I think it means lightning in Polish, is going to be the new best tank. Well, it is the new best damage per minute in World of Tanks. Ladies and gents, boys and girls, the Badger has been dethroned, at least in close quarters combat at 50 meters, as 3,500 damage per minute means that this vehicle, it's going to be the highest damage per minute in the game. There it is, better than the Badger by 115 damage per minute. That is not a small margin for an increase, especially when you also consider that this vehicle does get the reload reduction. So once you've got the field mods and you get yourself a gun rammer and you get yourself everything, what is this thing going to be doing? Should we just max it out? Let's max it out right now. Okay, gun rammer, we're going to get some vents on. We're going to set this to effective values just for now. We're going to add in a premium consumable, the bread with smarlets. There it is. We're also going to get ourselves brothers in arms. And then finally, we're going to throw in a directive, which is here, I believe. There you go, a directive for the orderly ammo rack. So previously, the highest possible damage per minute in World of Tanks was 4,800. The new highest possible damage per minute in World of Tanks will be 4,943 until, for example, you get something like Adrenaline Rush mixed into it. That is a terrifying prospect. We're talking about multiple mouse per minute. And the Badger was able to do that previously, but the Błyskawica is going to be doing it with even more recklessness. But just because it's got damage per minute at 50 meters doesn't mean that it's going to be special unless the rest of its statistics are. So 45 kilometers an hour is very nice for a top speed. It's going to be more like a medium tank, or a slow medium tank, or a fast heavy within that regard. 370 view range means that you will be able to spot for yourself without using coated optics once you've got the field mod that also increases your view range and decent crew skills. Talking about decent crew skills, you need a commander, a gunner, a driver, and a loader on all of these vehicles, with the commander working as a radio man as well, so make sure you've got a 0 skill commander there. Again, this vehicle has a horrible gun arc like all of the previous vehicles, 7 degrees of gun depression, which is okay. Let's take a look to see how the vehicle's armor holds up. Okay, that's fairly meaty, 300 millimeters of all-round armor and a tiny weak point that's going to be hard to hit on the front of this tank. The lower plate is pretty bad. Tier 8s will still struggle 50% of the time, but all the other vehicles won't. The side armor on this vehicle is pretty bad at 70, but I do like the way that the angling protects it a little bit more from the side. If it does get caught at an awkward angle, you can be able to shoot the mantlet here as well. The side armor on the hull, like 100, not too bad. Not great though, especially from the side here. But I think this thing is really going to do well when it's using its 7 degrees of gun depression. Okay, when it's using its 7 degrees of gun depression, this thing is an absolute monster frontally. What an assault TD. But not that much better than a Badger, I think, from that regard. I think this is quite similar to how the Badger's armor will work out. But remember, the Badger doesn't have these horrible flaps. The Badger has 50 millimeters of armor here, whereas the Błyskawica has 25 millimeters, so 76 millimeter caliber guns are going to overmatch. I guess a lot of people are going to think, is this thing the new best assault TD inside the game? Well, obviously the speed makes a big difference, but it does have better damage per minute than the Badger, that's for sure. But the problem is that the Błyskawica is only going to do that at 50 meters, whereas the Badger can do it up to 500 or even more meters, depending on where your opponents are situated. Now, from a standard rounds perspective, the Błyskawica looks like it's better than the Badger, but when we also factor in, and the rounds are like hidden here because they're not currently on Tanks GG, when both tanks load gold, then the Badger evens up the playing field and has pretty much the same penetration. And then it's just the alpha damage advantage and the shell velocity advantage. But remember, that shell velocity means nothing at long range on the Blyskawica. The Badger has the aim time, the accuracy, it has triple the gun arc, it has 3 extra degrees of gun depression. I'd say the Badger has comparable armor, and it doesn't have the issue where it can be overmatched here as well, which is a huge drawback on that tank. And good luck penning the Badger with pretty much anything when it's using its gun depression. It's an absolute monster. Whereas the Blyskawica, you're going to be able to go up into the flaps like that. I'd say the top speed, definitely, on the Blyskawica. But remember, once you've actually got into that assault position, does the speed really matter too much? It only matters in kind of making the flanking plays. And the Badger has the better camera rating and the better view range. I don't know, boys and girls. Looking at these statistics, undoubtedly, the Blyskawica looks like it's way better at just sitting in front of people and dumping with 800 alpha. But as soon as it's beyond that 50-meter engagement and you don't need the speed, it looks like the Badger is still the monster. So I think all in all, Wargaming looks like they've done a pretty good job with the Polish tank destroyers. I think the tier 8, 9, and 10 look really exciting. I think all of the previous ones, they're definitely not so exciting for me, and I wouldn't really be so focused on them. But look, if you're the kind of person like me who's already got all the tanks, don't just rush straight up to tier 10. Take your time, enjoy them. This is going to be our new content until we get the Czech light tanks with those little auto guns, which I guess will probably be coming more in kind of like the September or October mark now. So I wasn't expecting the Polish tank destroyers to come in April, but they undoubtedly will be, unless Wargaming finds they're completely broken and then pulls them out the patch, which I'd be surprised. So yeah, all in all, tier 8, 9, and 10 look really good. 5, 6, 7, not so good. Do I think that these tanks are going to break the game? No, but are they going to become incredible heavy tank counters and vehicles that you don't want to sit in front of? Yes, they really will do. I think that medium tanks and autoloaders are going to brutalize these vehicles because they'll have enough rounds to track them, get their side, and lock them in place. This vehicle, it's just going to have such a hard time with deciding what kind of equipment it wants to use. It's going to want the gun rammer to make that DPM extreme. It's going to be wanting things like vents possibly to improve that further, or to work that awful view range into getting into a position where you can play at long range. I would definitely recommend a durability device on this vehicle as well, because you don't want to get tracked and then have the awkward gun arc in front. But anyway, that's it for me today, ladies and gents. Really hope you enjoyed this look at the Polish tank destroyers, and also I hope it was helpful with the upgrade path on the tanks and how playable they are stocked, where to invest your free experience. If it was, give the video a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down, and let me know what you think about these Polish tank destroyers in the comments down below. Do you think they look insanely overpowered, or do you think they look relatively okay? Are you looking forward to playing them? Let me know what you think. And if you're watching this video as it goes live on Friday, I'm going live all day on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby, and I have brand new drops for you today, so you can get 100 battle pass points just for watching the stream. You're going to get yourself a series of missions, so if you're trying to make your way through the battle pass, then you can accelerate your progress by just claiming them today. So really looking forward to seeing you all live right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby, and as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.